Imagine boarding a plane, settling into your seat, and hearing the usual announcements. You know the drill, the standard safety talk, the reassuring voice of the flight attendants, and then, of course, the introduction to the pilot. But what happens when one of the passengers decides to push the limits, targeting the very person who's responsible for keeping the plane in the air? Picture this: a young, impatient passenger sneering at the age of the pilot, making cruel comments under his breath, and thinking that nobody can hear. Sounds like the beginning of a tense, uncomfortable flight, right? But hold on, because what happens next will send chills down your spine. Before we dive into this shocking story, I want you to think about something for a second. We all have moments when we've made assumptions about someone based on their age, their appearance, or some other superficial factor. Maybe you've had a moment where you judged someone too quickly, only to realize later you were dead wrong. We all do it, and that's part of what makes this story so captivating. It challenges the way we think about age, experience, and respect, all while pushing the limits of what we think we know about people. In this video, you're about to watch a situation unfold where assumptions are shattered in an unforgettable way. Trust me, you won't see this coming. Now, let's go back to that moment. The passenger, sitting in the back row, chuckles to himself, thinking his comment is just a harmless jab. "What's the old guy doing in the cockpit?" he mutters to his seatmate, his voice loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. It's a cruel, unnecessary remark, but it's not just any offhand comment. It's the kind of thing that might seem small but carries a weight of ignorance and arrogance. And the worst part? Nobody's really expecting the pilot to respond. Who would? Pilots are meant to be professional, calm, and, well, detached. They're up in the cockpit, doing their job, completely removed from the world of judgment and mockery below. Or are they? As the plane starts to taxi down the runway, the young passenger, still smirking, watches as the flight attendants go about their tasks. He has no idea what's about to happen next. But right before takeoff, something unexpected occurs. The plane's speaker system crackles to life, and a voice, smooth but carrying the authority of someone who's been in the skies for decades, echoes throughout the cabin. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." The pilot's voice begins, calm and steady. "This is Captain James Mitchell speaking. I've been flying for over 35 years now, and if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take a moment to talk about something important." You could feel the shift in the air. The casual hum of the plane quiets. The entire cabin goes silent. Everyone is wondering, what is he about to say? "Some of you may be wondering why I've been doing this for so long," the pilot continues. "But let me assure you, I'm still as capable as the day I first took the controls." Now, imagine being that passenger, the one who mocked the pilot just minutes ago. Can you feel that sinking feeling in your stomach? You've just been called out in front of everyone by the very person you thought was too old, too irrelevant to be trusted. The weight of those words is starting to hit him. But here's the twist. It's not just the passenger who's uncomfortable. Everyone on that plane feels it. The pilot's message wasn't just directed at him. It was a bold statement to everyone on board. It was a declaration that respect, experience, and competence should never be underestimated, no matter what someone's age might be. But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens next is something you absolutely have to see for yourself. The way the rest of the passengers react, the stunned silence that follows, and the tension in the air as the flight continues. You won't believe the turn this story takes. It's one of those moments that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about judgment and humility. So, what happens to that passenger, the one who thought he could get away with mocking someone's age? How does the rest of the flight play out after that shocking announcement? And most importantly, what does it reveal about us as individuals, as a society? Is there a lesson here for all of us? Something deeper that we can take away from this incredible story? As the plane hummed steadily through the skies, the passengers remained unnervingly quiet, each person absorbed in their own thoughts. But it wasn't just the atmosphere that had changed. The entire mood of the flight had shifted. It was almost as if everyone had collectively paused, unsure whether they should break the silence with small talk, or if they should remain still, waiting for something else to happen. And yet, As much as the moment seemed to hang in the air, no one knew exactly what was brewing beneath the surface. Let's take a step back for a moment and focus on the passenger at the heart of the situation, the one who had made that cutting remark about the pilot's age. His name was Derek, a young man in his early 30s with a confident swagger that bordered on arrogance. Derek wasn't just any passenger. He was the type of person who liked to be the center of attention, always the one to crack a joke or make a sarcastic comment, hoping for a laugh at someone else's expense. To him, age was just a number, something to be dismissed with a smirk, especially when it came to authority figures like pilots. He had spent his life believing that experience wasn't something to be revered, but something to be mocked. He'd watched enough online videos about overpaid professionals, old school bosses, and how younger generations were doing things better and faster to make him feel like his perspective was superior. But now, sitting in his seat on this plane, he felt an odd mixture of arrogance and unease creeping up his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Was it just his own guilt starting to weigh on him? Was it the unsettling tension in the air that had suddenly emerged after the pilot's announcement? Or was it something else entirely? As the plane continued its ascent, the red lights overhead flickered momentarily, signaling the transition to cruising altitude. At that exact moment, Derek's mind started to wander. He thought about the last few weeks of his life, trying to figure out what had led him to make such a reckless comment. Just days earlier, he had been embroiled in a heated argument with his boss back at work. The dispute had centered on Derek's belief that the company should modernize its approach, discard the outdated practices, fire the dinosaurs, and embrace younger, more progressive thinkers like himself. His relationship with his colleagues had always been a bit strained. He found it hard to connect with people who didn't share his worldview. He always felt as though he had something to prove, always seeking validation from others, especially those he deemed to be in positions of authority. And yet, here he was, now facing the consequences of mocking someone who, by all outward appearances, had every reason to be respected. It didn't help that, earlier in the week, he had received a call from his ex-girlfriend, whom he hadn't heard from in months. The conversation had been brief, but it was clear that she had moved on, and he was still stuck in the same place, constantly trying to prove that he was better than everyone else, more capable, more deserving. Derek's internal monologue was cut short by a low, grating noise from the plane's cabin. It wasn't a mechanical issue, but rather the sound of something or someone shifting in their seat. His eyes instinctively darted toward the aisle, where an elderly woman, sitting a few rows ahead of him, was adjusting her glasses. Her eyes met his for a moment, and in that fleeting glance, Derek felt something stir inside him. He quickly looked away, trying to shake off the discomfort that had begun to crawl under his skin. He hadn't even realized he had been staring at her until the moment passed, but it was enough to leave him wondering. What was that look? Was it sympathy? Or something else? The unsettling feeling was starting to grow, and it wasn't just the silent tension on the plane that was making him feel this way. It was something deeper, something he couldn't explain. But before he could dive any deeper into his own thoughts, he noticed something peculiar. The woman wasn't the only one looking at him now. In fact, several passengers were stealing glances in his direction, as though they were waiting for him to do or say something that would either redeem him or push him further into the hole he had already dug. The whispers were subtle, but they were there, circulating like a low hum just beneath the surface. There were several people on board who had overheard his comment about the pilot. Some of them seemed unbothered, but others? Their eyes said it all. They were quietly judging him, and the weight of it was starting to make him feel small. This wasn't how Derek usually felt. He was the one who controlled the room, the one who commanded attention, and yet, here he was, shrinking under the weight of a simple comment. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, their soft footsteps a reminder that the world of the airplane was still going on, despite the strange tension that had taken hold. One of them, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile, stopped by Derek's row and asked if he wanted anything to drink. He quickly nodded, eager to regain some semblance of control over the situation. As she turned to walk away, he overheard her quietly chatting with the passenger across the aisle, a man in a suit who had been silent throughout most of the flight. Derek couldn't catch all the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was something about the pilot's professionalism, about how calm and collected he had sounded when making that announcement. Derek's heart began to race as he realized that the murmurs weren't about him anymore. They were about the pilot, and something about the pilot's response was bothering people in a way he couldn't quite understand. Was the pilot's message to him only a warning, or was there something more to it? Could there have been a deeper connection between the pilot and the passengers on board, something hidden in plain sight? The tension was thickening now, and every passing minute seemed to add another layer to the mystery. But Derek, still trying to hold on to his bravado, couldn't help but feel the creeping doubt in his mind. What if I'm not the only one who's being watched? It was a chilling thought. Who else on this flight had a story to tell? Who else might be hiding something beneath the surface? There were too many possibilities, too many unanswered questions, and as the plane continued to soar, Derek couldn't help but wonder, what happens when the past catches up with you in the most unexpected ways? And then, as if to answer that question, the intercom crackled again. The voice of the pilot, calm as ever, filled the cabin once more, but this time, it was different. This time, the tone in his voice wasn't just professional, it was something else. Something that could only be described as personal. As the seconds ticked by, Derek couldn't shake the growing unease gnawing at him. The voice of the pilot had lingered in his mind, but something about the tone was off. It was as if the announcement wasn't just for the passengers, it was for him, too. But what exactly had the pilot meant? Was he warning Derek? Or was he subtly calling out something far more serious than a simple act of disrespect? The more Derek thought about it, the less certain he became. His gut told him there was something he wasn't seeing, something hidden just beneath the surface of the pilot's words. As the flight continued, Derek tried to push the thoughts out of his mind, but they kept creeping back, pushing him deeper into a spiral of doubt. He was a young man used to controlling the narrative around him, used to being the one in charge, the one who made the rules. But now, here he was, powerless to shake the strange feeling that something bigger was at play. He glanced around the cabin, his eyes searching for some clue that would provide the answers he desperately needed. The elderly woman who had caught his eye earlier was still there, still sitting quietly in her seat, but now there was a shift. Her demeanor seemed different, almost as though she knew more than she was letting on. Derek's suspicion grew. What if she knew something about the pilot? What if everyone on this flight was somehow connected, each playing a part in a story that he hadn't yet pieced together? He leaned forward, intending to ask her something, anything, just to get a sense of what was happening. But before he could even open his mouth, the man across the aisle, the one who had been silently watching him for the past hour, suddenly turned and gave him a piercing look. Derek froze. It wasn't the kind of look someone gives you out of curiosity or even mild interest. This was different. This was the look of someone who had seen something they shouldn't have, someone who knew more than they were willing to say. And Derek, for the first time in a long time, felt a chill crawl down his spine. He quickly turned away, trying to shake off the feeling, but it was no use. The flight had become a pressure cooker, and Derek was the one on the inside, slowly being cooked by his own doubts. The next few minutes felt like hours. He watched the flight attendants move through the cabin, serving drinks and snacks, but their usual chatter seemed absent. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts, of silent exchanges between strangers. The whole experience was starting to feel surreal, like something out of a movie where nothing was as it seemed, and everyone had an agenda. Derek's eyes drifted back to the woman, but this time, something caught his attention. A small piece of paper, barely visible in her lap, had slipped out from under her book. Derek's heart skipped a beat. It looked like a receipt, perhaps from the airport? Or was it something more? He couldn't tell, but there was an urgency in the way she clutched her bag, almost as if she didn't want him to get a closer look. A sinking feeling took hold of him. Was she hiding something? Just as he was about to reach for his phone to take a discreet picture of the paper, the seatbelt sign flashed on, signaling that turbulence was coming. The plane shook slightly, and for a moment, Derek was distracted, focusing on the smooth movement of the attendants as they strapped in for safety. The distraction was brief, but it was enough for the woman to quickly slip the paper into her bag, vanishing it from view. Derek cursed under his breath. He had been so close to something, and now it was gone. The question was, what had he just missed? And more importantly, why had she hidden it from him? The turbulence worsened for a few minutes, forcing everyone to settle into their seats, gripping the armrests tightly. Derek's mind raced, trying to make sense of the puzzle pieces that were beginning to fall into place. Why was it that every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, another roadblock appeared? Was he just paranoid, or was there something more to the strange occurrences happening around him? And then, just when he thought the storm had passed, the flight attendant who had been chatting with the man in the suit earlier came down the aisle again. This time, however, she stopped directly in front of Derek's row, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she gave him a polite smile. "Sir, I think we need to have a quick word," she said, her voice soft but firm. Derek's stomach twisted. What could she possibly want now? He had barely interacted with her, and yet it felt like she was aware of everything that had happened. The comment he made, the way the other passengers had looked at him, and now, the mysterious piece of paper. "I don't think it's wise to keep digging into things that don't concern you," she added, her tone low enough that only he could hear. "Some things are better left in the past, Derek." He froze, his breath caught in his chest. She knew his name. But how? He had never introduced himself, not to her, not to anyone. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. Who was this woman? What did she know? And why was she so determined to stop him from finding out more? Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the back of the plane. Derek was left in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did she just warn me? And then, as if to add another layer of mystery, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. The elderly woman, who had been so quiet and reserved, was now standing up, moving toward the bathroom at the front of the cabin. But as she passed by him, Derek noticed something strange, a tiny smudge of ink on her sleeve, barely noticeable, but unmistakably the same shade of blue as the writing on the piece of paper she had hidden earlier. It was a sign, and it was the last thing Derek needed to see. His mind exploded with possibilities. What was the connection? Was this woman the key to the mystery? And why had she been so careful about hiding whatever it was she had? The tension in the air was building once again. Derek was no longer just a passive observer. He was in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The pieces were starting to come together, but with every new discovery came more questions. Questions that were now tangled in a web of deceit, secrecy, and perhaps even betrayal. Was the pilot's calm announcement a warning, or had it been a message for someone else entirely? The truth was closer than ever, but every time Derek thought he was one step ahead, the ground shifted beneath him. And just as Derek reached for his phone to try and piece together the last few clues, the lights in the cabin flickered once again, casting everything into temporary darkness. When they came back on, it wasn't just the passengers who were missing something. Derek realized something else was gone as well. His phone. Gone. As if it had vanished into thin air. His heart skipped a beat. Was this sabotage? And if so, by who? The moment Derek realized his phone was gone, a cold wave of panic swept over him. He frantically searched the empty space beneath his seat, his hands trembling as they brushed against the hard plastic of the chair and the cold, metal armrests. There was no sign of his phone, no trace of the device that had been sitting in his pocket just moments before the lights went out. His pulse quickened, the noise of the plane's engines fading into a distant hum as his mind raced. He looked around at the other passengers, their faces a blur of indifference or concern, but no one seemed to be paying him any attention. Not that they should have. He wasn't exactly expecting sympathy, not when he had so obviously crossed a line earlier. But this was different. It wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It felt like someone was actively trying to silence him, to keep him from uncovering the truth. As Derek stood up, unable to shake the gnawing feeling that someone on this plane knew more than they were letting on, his mind flashed back to the warning from the flight attendant. Some things are better left in the past. The words echoed in his ears, and with them, a creeping realization that the stakes had suddenly become far higher than he could have imagined. He wasn't just a random passenger on a flight anymore. He had unknowingly stumbled into something far bigger, a mystery that wasn't just his to solve. He glanced toward the front of the plane, where the elderly woman had disappeared into the bathroom, and his thoughts circled back to her. What was she hiding? What was her connection to the pilot? And why had she been so careful with that scrap of paper? It all felt too coordinated, too deliberate. But Derek wasn't the only one this plane ride had affected. Back home, Derek's younger sister, Lily, was anxiously watching the news, her phone buzzing with an alert about a missing person in their city. It wasn't just any missing person, it was one of Derek's old friends, a guy named Alex who had been a part of their circle back in high school. The report was vague, but it mentioned a connection to a recent plane incident. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She knew Derek had been flying that morning, and something in her gut told her that the story on the news wasn't a coincidence. She had always been protective of Derek, trying to shield him from the consequences of his reckless behavior. But this was something else. Lily sent Derek a text, but there was no response. She tried calling, but the line went straight to voicemail. Her anxiety grew as she pulled up the details of the news story again, scanning the report for any mention of her brother's name, only to find that it was deliberately vague. Her fingers hovered over her phone as she weighed the options. Was she just being paranoid, or was something bigger at play? As she stared at the article, the unsettling feeling grew. She felt disconnected from her brother, as if there were invisible walls between them now. She knew he hadn't been the most open about his life lately, especially with everything going on at work, but this felt like more than just a family spat. Derek's old friend Alex, who had always been somewhat of a wild card, had kept in touch sporadically, but their relationship had been strained for years. It wasn't so much that they had fallen out. It was just that Derek had always been caught up in his own world, his own ambitions, while Alex had done his best to stay out of the spotlight. But this news report, something about it felt off, like it was directly connected to Derek, and Lily knew she had to act fast. She called their mother, trying to get any information, but her mom's voice was oddly distant, as if she, too, had been shaken by something. Lily couldn't explain it, but there was a strange weight in her mother's tone, as if something hidden was being kept from her, too. Meanwhile, back on the flight, Derek's frustration was growing. With no phone and no clear lead on what was happening, he knew he needed answers. He had no idea where to start. But his thoughts kept circling back to the elderly woman and her strange behavior. He stood up again, more determined this time, and began to move toward the front of the cabin, where she had gone. But just as he took a step, the lights flickered once more, this time for longer than before, casting the plane in near-complete darkness for what felt like an eternity. A low hum of murmuring filled the cabin as passengers shifted in their seats. The turbulence had intensified, and the flight attendants quickly moved through the aisles, guiding everyone to buckle up. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back into his seat, gripping the armrests to steady himself. The moment the lights came back on, he saw it, a figure in a black hoodie standing near the rear of the plane, his face obscured by the shadows. The figure didn't seem to belong, and yet, there he was, standing motionless. Derek's breath caught in his throat as he realized the man was staring directly at him. For a split second, their eyes locked, and in that instant, Derek knew. This wasn't just a random passenger. This person, whoever he was, knew exactly who Derek was, and he was watching him. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Derek's mind raced as the wheels began to turn in his head. Was this man connected to the woman? To the pilot? To the strange disappearance of his phone? Or was he just another pawn in a much larger game, a game that Derek had only just begun to understand? Before Derek could make a move, the man turned and disappeared into the galley, vanishing from sight. Derek hesitated, torn between staying in his seat or following him. But before he could make up his mind, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again, this time with a strange, almost unsettling clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence," the pilot's calm voice echoed. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We'll be out of this soon enough, but in the meantime, I must remind you that some situations are better left unexamined." Derek's heart stopped. The pilot hadn't just spoken those words, he had delivered them with intent, with meaning that Derek couldn't quite grasp. What was going on? Was this all a coincidence? Or was something far more sinister at play, something that had been carefully orchestrated from the beginning? The mystery was only growing deeper, and as Derek sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing with questions and doubts, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away now. The stakes were too high, and he was already in too deep to turn back. But as the plane continued its course, it became clear that there was no easy way out. Everyone on this flight had their own secrets, their own motives, and no one was quite who they seemed to be. And for Derek, the most dangerous part of all was the growing realization that he might not be able to trust anyone, not even himself. The air in the cabin felt thicker now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Derek's fingers gripped the edge of his seat so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and his breath was shallow, his heart pounding faster with every passing second. Something was wrong, so wrong, that he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the unsettling realization began to settle in. This wasn't just a case of an odd flight, a strange encounter, or a mysterious passenger. It was much worse. He was being followed, and whoever was behind this, they weren't going to let him walk away unscathed. Derek's eyes flicked nervously around the cabin, scanning every face in the crowd. He saw a couple of familiar passengers, all seated quietly, but there was something off about the way they were looking at him, like they knew more than they should, or perhaps they were simply too calm for what was happening around them. That's when he noticed it again, the figure in the hoodie, now positioned just a few rows ahead, staring directly at him from under the dim light. His face was still obscured, but the chilling sensation of being tracked, hunted even, crawled under Derek's skin. As the plane jolted with another round of turbulence, Derek's mind raced. Why was this happening? What was the connection between this strange woman, the unsettling pilot, the disappearing phone, and now this mysterious figure who seemed to be lurking at every turn? The pieces didn't fit together, they couldn't. And the more he tried to make sense of it, the more the edges blurred into something terrifyingly obscure. His instinct screamed at him to act, but fear kept him frozen in place, unsure of what was real and what was simply his growing paranoia. Then, just as the unease reached its peak, the lights flickered again, this time longer than before. The whole plane plunged into an eerie darkness, and Derek's stomach dropped. The sudden loss of visibility felt like a cruel joke, but the worst part was the feeling that he wasn't alone in the dark. His breath hitched, his pulse raced. His mind kept cycling through scenarios. What if someone had tampered with the plane system? What if this entire flight was a setup? What if he was already too deep in something he couldn't control? When the lights finally came back on, the man in the hoodie was gone. Derek blinked, trying to adjust his vision, but he couldn't find him anywhere. Panic surged through him as the sense of unease deepened into dread. Was he being lured into something? Were they trying to break him, confuse him, scare him into silence? He leaned forward in his seat, the weight of the situation settling like a heavy stone in his chest. This wasn't just a flight, it was a game, and Derek was in the center of it, trapped. And then the message appeared, just as the pilot's voice rang through the intercom again, this time with an unsettling calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that a situation has escalated. Please remain in your seats and stay calm. We are making immediate adjustments to secure the aircraft." Derek's heart slammed in his chest, and his phone, which had miraculously reappeared in his pocket, buzzed. The screen was filled with a single, cryptic message: "Stop digging, or there will be consequences." The message was brief, but it hit Derek like a punch to the gut. The calm tone of the pilot's announcement was suddenly overshadowed by the cold, threatening words on his screen. Was it a warning? A threat from the very people who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows? The fear that had gripped Derek's chest now twisted into something darker. He was in real danger. But from who? Suddenly, The atmosphere around him changed. The passengers, who had been murmuring quietly, fell silent. Derek's eyes darted from face to face, trying to read their expressions, but it was as if the entire plane had turned into a sea of strangers, none of them trustworthy. He felt exposed, vulnerable. It wasn't just his life on the line now, it was the lives of everyone on board. A sudden scream broke through the air, sharp and terrifying. Derek's eyes shot to the back of the cabin, where a woman, one of the older passengers he hadn't noticed before, was standing in the aisle, clutching her throat. The flight attendants rushed over, trying to calm her down, but it was clear something was very wrong. She wasn't choking. She was gasping for air, her face pale and contorted in a way that didn't look natural. Was it a panic attack? Or something far worse? Derek tried to stand, to move toward her, but the sense of being paralyzed by the situation took over. His thoughts blurred as he struggled to make sense of everything happening around him. The woman's scream had felt like a signal, a warning. But to what? His gut told him this wasn't an isolated incident. Everything that had happened up until now had been building to this moment, a breaking point where the danger wasn't just outside the cabin but creeping into every corner of his life. And then the sound of footsteps echoed through the aisle. Soft at first, but growing louder and closer. Derek's head snapped toward the source, but it wasn't the woman at the back or the crew moving in a rush. It was a figure, walking slowly, deliberately. His eyes widened as the man from earlier, the one in the hoodie, emerged from the shadows once again, this time stopping just a few feet away from Derek. His face was still concealed, but there was something in his posture, something in the way he stood there, that told Derek everything he needed to know. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just some chance encounter. This was a direct confrontation. The man didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching Derek with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. The tension in the air thickened, suffocating Derek's thoughts, clouding his judgment. It was as if the entire plane had grown colder, darker. The noise of the engines seemed to dull, and for a moment, it felt as if the world outside the cabin had ceased to exist. Everything narrowed to this one moment, this one silent exchange. The man in the hoodie finally reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He didn't hand it to Derek, but placed it carefully on the seat beside him, as if it were a gift. Derek stared at the paper, his mind racing, but his body unwilling to move. He felt paralyzed, unable to take his eyes off the figure in front of him. Before he could react, the man turned, his footsteps disappearing into the growing darkness of the plane. Derek's breath was shallow as his fingers slowly reached for the paper, his hand trembling as he unfolded it. It was blank, except for one word written in bold, jagged letters: run. The plane shook violently as another round of turbulence hit, and for a moment, Derek lost all sense of time, his pulse racing in sync with the erratic movement of the aircraft. He was being dragged deeper into a nightmare he didn't understand, and now, with a single cryptic warning, the stakes had been raised. No longer was this about curiosity or the search for answers. This was survival. Something was coming, and Derek had no choice but to confront it, whether he was ready or not. Derek's heart raced as he gripped the small, crumpled paper in his hand, still trying to make sense of the cryptic message that now haunted him. Run. His mind reeled with questions. What did it mean? Why was it blank except for that single word? Why was he being threatened in the first place? His gaze darted around the plane, his nerves on edge. The mystery had taken a dangerous turn, but what if the danger wasn't just about the threats? What if everything he thought he knew had been wrong? The weight of the situation pressed on him, making it hard to think clearly. His hand was still trembling when he folded the paper again, slipping it into his jacket pocket as he stood up. The woman in the back of the plane, what was happening to her? Was her collapse just another part of the plot, or was there something more sinister going on that he hadn't considered yet? As he made his way toward the back of the cabin, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, unexpected voice that sent a chill down his spine. Derek. He froze, his blood turning cold. The voice was low, calm, too calm, and it was coming from the flight attendant he had noticed earlier. The the same one who had been acting strangely, offering too many polite smiles while her eyes never seemed to meet his. He had thought it was just nerves, part of the stress of being in the air, but now he realized it was something else. There was something off about her, something he had missed in the haze of all that had been happening. "Derek, I think it's time we talk." His stomach dropped. He took a cautious step forward, but his instinct screamed at him to back away, to not trust her, to run from whatever this was. But it was too late now. The words "run" still echoed in his mind, but now they felt like a cruel joke. He had no choice but to listen to what she had to say. Slowly, he turned to face her, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" The flight attendant, whose name he still didn't know, smiled. No, it wasn't a smile. It was something colder, calculated. Her eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to gauge his reaction, but there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, something he couldn't place. "I'm the one who's been watching you," she said, leaning closer. "And I think you're beginning to realize that you've been part of something much bigger than you thought." His mind reeled, his body freezing in place as her words sank in. "Watching you?" He didn't know what to believe. The tension in his chest tightened, and for a brief moment, it felt as if everything he had been feeling up until now, the unease, the paranoia, the fear, had all been building to this moment. But what was she saying? He had no answers, no clarity. All he knew was that the ground beneath him was shifting, and with each step, he was falling further into a hole with no way out. "You were never supposed to know," she continued, her voice still calm, but there was an edge to it now. "The messages, the strange people, they were all part of the plan. But you've been poking around where you shouldn't." Derek's stomach twisted. His head spun as he tried to piece together the fragments of information, but nothing fit together in a way that made sense. "Plan? What plan? What are you talking about?" She glanced around the cabin, making sure no one was paying attention, before lowering her voice even further. "There's more to the pilot than you realize. He's not just some old man behind the controls. He's a key player in something far larger. And you, Derek, you've just stumbled into the middle of it." Derek's heart hammered in his chest as his mind tried to make sense of what she was saying. The pilot? Was she implying he was involved in something criminal? Derek had always found the pilot's age odd, but never dangerous. And now this. His head was swimming with confusion, his senses on high alert. He wanted to push her for more answers, but before he could speak, the flight attendant leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "That man you've been seeing, he's not who you think he is either. He's been waiting for you to figure things out. But what you don't know is that you're being played. All of this." She gestured vaguely around the plane, as if everything was part of some sick game. "Is a test. And you're the target." Derek stepped back, his mind racing. Was she lying? Was she part of some elaborate plot to get him to make a move? But the way she spoke, so confidently, so assuredly, struck a nerve. There was something genuine about her words, even though the revelation was impossible to believe. She had to be involved in some way. She had to be. But then, as if the universe had conspired against him, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He barely glanced at it, but when he did, his blood went cold. The message was brief, cold, and chilling. "She's one of them. Don't trust her." The sender was anonymous, and for a moment, Derek couldn't breathe. Was this another threat, or a warning? Was it someone else who had been tracking his every move, or had he been wrong all along about who he could trust? The flight attendant's smile faltered as she noticed his reaction. She was watching him closely, studying him like a chess piece, waiting for his next move. "Don't believe everything you see, Derek," she whispered, a cold glint in her eyes. "But don't wait too long to figure it out. There are people who don't want you to walk away from this." Derek could feel the ground beneath him shift, the reality of the situation slipping further from his grasp. He was no longer sure of anything, no longer sure who to trust, no longer sure of what was really going on. He was tangled in a web of lies, of betrayals, of secrets that no one should ever have to uncover. And as the plane continued its journey through the sky, it became clear to him that he was about to face a choice that could change everything, and not just for him, but for everyone aboard. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back from the flight attendant, his thoughts swirling like a tornado. His mind could barely keep up with the flood of information. Every word she had spoken seemed to unravel the very fabric of reality that he had been living in for the past few days. The words on the paper, the odd occurrences, the mysterious figures, it was all connected. But to what? And why him? Why was he being targeted in the first place? What if he had been caught up in something far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined? As he stared at the flight attendant, her calm, calculating demeanor only made him feel more isolated. She had been part of the puzzle all along, he realized, but was she a key player or just another pawn? His breath came in shallow gasps as a dark, creeping feeling of betrayal slithered up his spine. Could she have been playing him this whole time, manipulating him with lies and half-truths? Then the phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Derek almost didn't want to pick up, knowing that whatever it was would only complicate things further. But his instinct screamed at him to answer, to face whatever was coming head-on. He swiped the screen, his hands shaking as he put the phone to his ear. "Hello." His voice barely made it past his lips, strained and hoarse. "Derek, you need to listen to me," came the voice on the other end, sharp and urgent. It was his best friend, Matt. Matt's voice, though familiar, now sounded distant, like someone he didn't fully recognize. "I know what's happening. I know everything. You need to get off that plane. Now." Derek's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's going on? Just trust me, okay? You're in danger. I can't explain everything right now, but you need to get out of there before it's too late." Matt's voice cracked with urgency, the kind of panic that Derek had never heard before. "The people behind this, they're much more dangerous than you think. They know who you are and they know what you've been doing. You've been marked, Derek. You need to leave, now." The words hit him like a slap to the face, sending a cold rush through his veins. Everything that had felt surreal, all the strange encounters and threats, suddenly began to take on an ominous clarity. The stakes weren't just high anymore. They were life and death. But there was a catch. There always was as Derek stood there, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He saw the flight attendant glance toward him again. Her eyes had changed, something darker, something almost threatening in the way she looked at him now. He felt the weight of her gaze, heavy and suffocating, as if she was waiting for him to make his move. And then the message came through on his phone. A simple text with no name attached, but the words hit him like a hammer. "If you try to leave the plane, we'll make sure you never walk again." The threat was unmistakable, clear as day. Derek felt his pulse spike. He wasn't sure who had sent it, whether it was the flight attendant, someone else on the plane, or someone watching from the outside, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no easy way out. "Matt, what the hell is going on?" Derek whispered into the phone, panic creeping into his voice. I don't know how to explain it, man," Matt stammered. "All I can say is that you've stumbled into something you shouldn't have. These people, they're connected to the pilot, to the flight crew. But it's bigger than that. You're part of something they're controlling now, Derek. If you try to fight back, if you keep asking questions, they'll come for you. And anyone who's close to you." Derek felt the weight of the phone slip in his hand as his mind raced. "Anyone who's close to you." Matt's warning echoed in his ears. His thoughts flashed to the people he loved, the ones who were back home, completely unaware of the hell he was caught up in. Could they be in danger too? Was it possible that these people, whoever they were watching everyone close to him? The fear of not being able to protect those he cared about hit him like a physical blow. But as much as Derek wanted to drop everything and escape, something inside him, something deep and insistent, told him to keep pushing forward. He had to uncover the truth. He had to. There were too many pieces to the puzzle, too many unanswered questions, and Derek wasn't the type to back down, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. "I can't leave, Matt," he said, his voice low but firm. "I can't just run away. I need to figure this out." The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. Matt's voice finally came through, barely a whisper. "If you don't leave now, Derek, you're going to regret it." Derek looked around the cabin, his eyes darting from one person to the next. His pulse raced. There were people watching him, but who could he trust? The flight attendant, The one who had been manipulating him? Or Matt, his lifelong friend? Could he risk ignoring Matt's warning and follow his gut, or was he already too deep into this mess to pull out now? The choices were impossible, the stakes higher than they'd ever been before. The flight attendant stepped closer, her expression unreadable now. She didn't say a word but held up her phone, showing him a text, a picture of his mother standing outside his apartment building, a shadowy figure behind her, looming like a predator. Derek's blood ran cold. The message was clear. You do not have the luxury of making your own choices anymore. The truth hung in the air like a suffocating cloud, and for the first time in his life, Derek realized just how much danger he was really in. If he tried to fight back now, he would risk losing everything: his family, his friends, his life. But if he stayed on the plane, if he kept digging, he was only digging himself deeper into a hole that might have no escape. He had one choice, and it was the hardest one he'd ever have to make. Stay and risk losing it all, or run and hope that he could ever piece together the shattered truth. Derek's mind was racing as the world around him blurred into a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The reality he thought he knew, the safe, predictable life he had once led, was slipping through his fingers like sand. Every conversation, every encounter, every clue, it all pointed to something far larger, far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about him anymore. The stakes had grown beyond his own survival. He wasn't just caught up in a web of lies and threats. He was part of a conspiracy that spanned much deeper, much farther than he could have ever believed. The flight attendant, once a seemingly innocent player in the game, was no longer just a threat. She was a key figure in something that reached its dark fingers into every corner of his life. But that wasn't the worst part. As he tried to make sense of the texts, the cryptic phone calls, and the terrifying evidence mounting against him, Derek's thoughts turned to Matt, his best friend, his confidant. It was Matt who had warned him, Matt who had urged him to leave the plane, and now it seemed like Matt was part of the very conspiracy he was fighting to escape. The thought twisted like a knife in Derek's gut. Was Matt the one pulling the strings? Was he the one who had been leading him into the trap all along? His best friend, the person he trusted with his life, the one who had been like family to him, might be the very person responsible for everything that was happening. His heart sank as his mind replayed every moment they had shared over the years, the late-night conversations, the trust they had built, the laughter they had shared. Was it all just a facade? Were those moments, those bonds, nothing more than carefully constructed lies meant to lull him into a false sense of security? Derek's stomach churned as he stood there, the weight of his uncertainty pressing down on him with unbearable force. He looked back at the flight attendant, her eyes as cold as ice, her smile twisted into something sinister. She knew something he didn't, something crucial that was still just beyond his reach. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers, but the more he dug, the more it seemed like the world was closing in on him. And that's when it hit him. The moment that turned everything upside down. The flight attendant's phone buzzed, a message flashing across her screen. She looked at it, then at Derek, and without a word, handed him the phone. His hands were shaking as he read the message that would change everything. Matt has been compromised. He's not who you think he is. The countdown has started. Make your choice now. The message felt like a gut punch, its implications far more severe than he could have ever anticipated. Matt, the one person he thought he could count on, was part of this. He was entangled in this web of deceit and danger, and Derek had been blind to it all along. He had been led here, manipulated by the very person he trusted most. But the question lingered in his mind like an open wound. How much had Matt known? Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. His hands trembling, he pulled it out, hoping against hope that it was Matt calling to explain, to tell him the truth. But when he saw the name on the screen, a known number, his heart dropped into his stomach. He hesitated, staring at the phone for a moment before answering. Derek. The voice on the other end was low, distorted. This is bigger than you think. You're in way over your head. Matt isn't just compromised, he's been working with them from the start. The words hit him like a freight train, each one more shocking than the last. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything he had believed, everything he had trusted, was unraveling in front of him. His best friend, the one person who had always been by his side, was now his enemy. The betrayal stung deeper than anything he had ever experienced. The voice continued, cold and menacing. The people behind this aren't just after you, Derek. They're after everyone connected to you. It's not just your family at risk anymore. It's anyone who has ever crossed paths with you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. They've already made their move. Before Derek could respond, the call ended abruptly. The phone dropped from his hand, crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. He felt his knees buckle beneath him as everything he had known and loved spiraled into chaos. There was no escaping this now. The web was too tangled, the enemies too many. He had no choice but to keep moving forward, even as the walls closed in around him. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Someone was coming. Derek's eyes darted toward the door, his heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't stay here any longer. But where could he go? What could he do? The plane, the flight, the people, it was all part of a much larger game, and he was just a pawn. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. This was no longer just about him and Matt. This was about something much bigger, something that spanned continents, governments, corporations, and beyond. And now, Derek was caught in the center of it all, with no way out. As the footsteps grew louder, Derek's mind raced. His options were few. Fight or flee. Confront the truth, or run from it. The flight attendant stood near the door, her eyes fixed on him, a silent witness to the collapse of everything he thought he understood. It was clear that whatever he decided next would determine not only his fate, but the fate of everyone he loved. But there was something else. Something Derek hadn't considered until now. The voice on the phone had been distorted, but there was something in the tone, something in the way it had spoken, that struck him as familiar. It wasn't just a random stranger. No, this was someone he knew, someone close to him. Someone who was closer than he realized. And with that, the weight of the decision hit him like a freight train. He had no choice but to confront the nightmare head-on. But would he be able to survive long enough to uncover the truth? Or had he already sealed his fate the moment he stepped onto that plane? The tension in the air was suffocating as Derek stood in the dimly lit hallway, his hand gripping the cold metal of the doorframe, his heart racing in his chest. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape before it was too late, but something deep inside told him that this moment, this confrontation, was inevitable. He had no choice. The pieces were all falling into place, and the truth was just within his reach. But at what cost? He tried to piece it together in his mind. The cryptic phone call, the unexpected betrayal, Matt's involvement, and the flight attendant's strange behavior, but none of it had made sense until now. He had followed the trail, each step taking him deeper into a rabbit hole of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. But nothing had prepared him for this final moment. Standing before him was the man who had orchestrated it all, the puppet master pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The man he had trusted. The one who had been feeding him information all along. It was Matt. Derek's eyes locked with his best friend's, but there was no trace of the person he had once known. Gone was the friendly smile, the warmth that had once defined their bond. In its place was a cold, calculating expression, one that sent a chill down Derek's spine. It was as if Matt had never been the person he thought he was. He was someone else entirely. A stranger. A betrayer. You really thought you could figure this out, didn't you? Matt's voice was low, almost mocking, as he took a step forward, closing the gap between them. You thought you were smarter than everyone else, that you could uncover the truth and walk away unscathed. But you were never meant to know the truth, Derek. Not until it was too late. Derek's mind was reeling. He had come so close to the answers, to uncovering the mystery that had consumed him for weeks, but now, standing in front of Matt, it all seemed so hollow. Every decision, every step he had taken had been manipulated. It was all part of a game that Derek hadn't been playing, but rather had been a pawn in from the very beginning. Why, Matt? Derek's voice broke the silence, his words heavy with disbelief. Why would you do this? All this time, were you just using me? Matt's laugh echoed through the hallway, dark and unsettling. It wasn't personal, Derek. It was never about you. You were just a means to an end. A way to get to something bigger, something more important. You weren't the only one being played. I was too. Derek's stomach dropped as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. What are you talking about? What's bigger than all of this? But before Matt could answer, the door behind him slammed open and a figure stepped into the room. Derek's breath caught in his throat as he saw who it was. The flight attendant. But she wasn't just a pawn in Matt's game. She was part of something far more sinister. The cold, calculating look in her eyes told Derek everything he needed to know. She had been watching him all along, every move, every step he took. She had been playing him just as much as Matt had. You were never meant to be a part of this, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You were always just a distraction. A small piece of the puzzle. We couldn't afford for you to get too close. And now, well, now it's too late. Derek's mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything he had just learned. Matt wasn't the mastermind. Neither was the flight attendant. They had been working for someone else, someone much more powerful, someone with resources and reach that Derek couldn't even begin to comprehend. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized the full scope of what he was up against. It wasn't just a flight, a conspiracy, or a betrayal. It was a far-reaching, well-orchestrated operation that spanned continents, governments, and corporations. And Derek had stumbled right into the center of it. But as the realization sank in, a final, gut-wrenching twist came crashing down on him. Matt stepped back, his eyes cold, as he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a flash drive. This, he said, holding it up, is what it was all about. Everything. The evidence. The key. The leverage. You were never supposed to find this. But you did. And now, you're standing at the crossroads. You can walk away, Derek. You can leave and never look back. Or you can join us, help us, and be a part of something that changes everything. Derek felt his blood run cold. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a vice. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was about survival. He knew Matt. He knew how far he would go to get what he wanted. But there was no way Derek could just walk away. Not now. Not after everything he had learned. The tension in the room was unbearable. Derek was trapped between two worlds, the one he knew, the one he had fought to protect, and the one that Matt and the flight attendant were trying to pull him into. They had already made their move. There was no going back. And then, as Derek's hand reached for the flash drive, his mind suddenly screamed one last warning. It was too easy. This was exactly what they wanted. Before he could act, everything around him exploded into chaos. The ground shook as a loud crash rang through the room, and the walls seemed to tremble with the force of it. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow, and Derek's body went rigid with fear. The door behind him exploded open, and a group of armed men stormed into the room, weapons drawn. But it wasn't just any group. It was a new player in the game, one Derek hadn't seen coming. The men were masked, their faces hidden behind black visors, and their movements were calculated, swift, and dangerous. "Drop it, Derek," one of them said, his voice muffled through the mask. "This ends now." Derek's heart raced, his mind spinning with disbelief. He had been so close. So close to finally uncovering the truth, to ending this nightmare. But now, as the armed men closed in, it was clear. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And no one, not even the people he thought he could trust, were safe. In that moment, Derek understood the full extent of the danger he was in. And as the world around him plunged into chaos, he realized with a sinking heart that the real battle, the one for his life, his freedom, and the truth, was only just beginning. The dust had finally settled, but Derek's mind was anything but clear. The world had shifted beneath his feet in ways he could never have anticipated. The armed men who had stormed the room were only a small part of the larger web he had been caught in, and even now, the full extent of it all wasn't completely clear. They had taken him far away, hidden him in a place where answers were scarce and time seemed to stretch on forever. But in the silence that followed, something changed. Something that Derek had been desperately hoping for, a sense of closure, seemed to start taking form. Days had passed since that night, and as he sat in the dimly lit room, his thoughts constantly circling back to that final confrontation. He had barely escaped the grasp of the faceless men, but in the chaos that followed, one thing had become clear. Matt's betrayal, the flight attendant's role, and the shadowy figures behind it all were part of a much larger, far-reaching conspiracy. Yet even now, the mystery felt incomplete, like a puzzle with one missing piece. Derek had learned so much, too much, but some things remained elusive. Why had Matt turned on him? What had pushed him to betray the very person he had called a friend? And who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning? He thought about those questions endlessly, hoping that the answers would come in time, but for now, the only thing he had was the weight of the journey he had just completed. The truth had been too much to bear, too overwhelming to comprehend. And as much as he wanted to put it all behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Months went by, and Derek tried to rebuild what was left of his life, but the scars of the past lingered in ways he hadn't expected. The conspiracy still haunted him, like a shadow that never fully receded. Every small thing, a strange phone call, a passing glance, felt like a reminder that something bigger was always just around the corner, waiting to resurface. His nights were filled with restless dreams, his mind constantly returning to the people who had betrayed him, to the secrets they kept hidden, and to the choice he had made to walk away from it all. The decision had been difficult, but ultimately, he had chosen peace. He had given up his pursuit of the full truth, unable to continue down a path that had already cost him so much. Maybe the world wasn't ready for the answers. Maybe some things were better left unsaid. But even as Derek tried to move on, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, half expecting it to be another scam call or an old acquaintance trying to reconnect. But it wasn't. It was a message from an unknown number. "It's not over, Derek. Not yet." The message was short, simple, but it sent a chill down his spine, as if all the pieces were slowly sliding back into place, the puzzle that he thought had been solved suddenly coming apart once more. Derek felt his pulse quicken, his body freezing as the realization hit him. There were still people out there, people connected to the conspiracy he thought he had escaped, and they weren't done with him yet. He stood there, staring at the message, his mind racing. Should he ignore it, keep moving forward with his life? Or should he dive back into the darkness, risk everything once more to uncover what he had left behind? He had thought that leaving the past in the past was his only option, but now, standing on the edge of that decision once again, he couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. The stakes had never been higher, and he knew that the choice he made now would determine everything. Would he allow himself to be pulled back into the web, or would he walk away, never looking back? As the screen of his phone went dark, a heavy silence fell over the room. For a brief moment, Derek felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The path ahead was unclear, the consequences of his actions both terrifying and unknown. But one thing was certain, this was far from over. The story he had thought was finished was only just beginning. And as he stood there, lost in thought, the faintest sound echoed through the silence. A knock at the door. Derek's heart skipped a beat as he slowly walked toward it, the uncertainty of what lay behind that door gnawing at him. He had a feeling that when he opened it, his life would never be the same again. The door creaked open. No one was there, but a small, folded piece of paper lay on the doorstep. Derek's breath caught in his throat as he bent down to pick it up, his hands trembling. He unfolded the paper, the words on it stark and clear. "You're being watched." It was a warning, but it was also a promise. A promise that this would never be over. The story, the mystery, the conspiracy, it would all continue, in ways Derek could never have imagined. And as the door slowly closed behind him, a dark, unsettling feeling settled in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't free. Not yet. And that would linger with him long after the story had ended.